Breaking news, FBI and DEA arrest 5,500 in Arizona takedown on Cjng, 5 tunnels and 2.4 tons.
What happens when a state wakes up to discover that its security lines, border airport law enforcement have been breached from the inside not by an invading army, but by an invisible network built beneath its feet? That question tore across Arizona at 4 a.m. when darkness was split open by helicopter rotors, floodlights, and tactical teams storming safe houses in dozens of neighborhoods. Residents jolted awake to explosions echoing off the desert floor. Streets glowed red and blue as armored vehicles rolled past homes still wrapped in silence. Federal radios crackled with a single directive: all targets must fall simultaneously. And somewhere deep underground, beneath layers of sand and concrete, 5 tunnels engineered like covert subways waited to be exposed. The state was about to learn that the danger wasn't crossing the border, it was already inside. The pre-dawn eruption of Operation Desert Citadel marked the beginning of the largest federal takedown in Arizona's modern history. Launched under President Donald Trump's renewed border security directives, bolstered by recent pressure from Congress after rising overdose deaths reported by Reuters and the CDC, the raid was triggered by a revelation so severe that agencies could no longer delay. Investigators had uncovered a synchronized network built by the Cjng cartel, reinforced tunnels, airport infiltration, corrupt officials, and a trafficking pipeline capable of moving 2.4 tons of narcotics every month. The findings aligned with reporting from the BBC and Al Jazeera, both noting a spike in cartel sophistication and deepening links between Mexican syndicates and American logistical vulnerabilities. The event itself played out like a cinematic invasion. Helicopters thundered over Phoenix and Tucson. SWAT teams moved door to door with night vision precision. At 4:03 a.m., ramming charges hit metal nearly simultaneously across 147 different targets. DEA intelligence teams later briefed that the timing window had been only 90 seconds. Any delay would have allowed suspects to vanish, burn evidence, or activate encrypted relays connected to the tunnels. The operation was designed to be total overwhelming and irreversible. Strategically, the discovery of 5 cross-border tunnels, each reinforced with ventilation, electricity, and rail systems, represented a severe breach. Defense News and Janes had long warned that cartels were evolving into paramilitary hybrid networks, combining engineering, bribery, and digital command systems. Analysts now argued that America's challenge was no longer just a border problem, it was a structural infiltration threatening national prestige. If tunnels could be built unnoticed, what else could be? Global parallels were impossible to ignore. Russia's underground logistics in eastern Ukraine, Iran's use of hardened tunnel networks for missile storage, and China's covert maritime routes in the South China Sea all showed the same pattern: adversaries exploiting seams in larger powers' defenses. Arizona had become the domestic version of what U.S. intelligence was already confronting abroad: a quiet erosion of strategic control. The human impact was equally severe. Families in Phoenix and Yuma had already endured a 380% rise in fentanyl deaths, according to state records and reporting from The Guardian. Many now asked whether their tragedies were the result of a pipeline operating right below their communities. The line between foreign threat and domestic fallout had dissolved. So the question now hangs over Arizona and the entire nation. If a network this large can grow in silence, what else remains hidden beneath the surface? And will Americans demand accountability before the next breach emerges? What else lies beneath American soil that no one has dared to look for? That question gained terrifying weight as investigators descended into the first tunnel, its concrete walls cold, its ventilation fans still humming. The discovery felt less like a criminal hideout and more like an unauthorized extension of U.S. infrastructure. Lights ran the length of the passage. Steel rails held custom carts engineered to move multi-hundred-pound loads with speed. The tunnel didn't look improvised, it looked designed, and that realization sent a ripple of dread through every agency involved. Federal briefings later revealed the full-scale 5 tunnels running from Sonora into Arizona, each built with industrial precision and insulated to avoid seismic detection. According to early reporting from Reuters, the engineering rivaled the complex smuggling corridors discovered beneath Gaza and parts of eastern Ukraine. But here, the breach was under American territory. The tunnels formed the backbone of a trafficking machine capable of flooding the country's interior long before law enforcement could react. Events unfolded rapidly. Evidence teams found 62 containers, each packed with fentanyl methamphetamine or bundled cash awaiting transport. In one tunnel, a sealed ledger identified weekly, not monthly shipments. The operation had become so smooth, so routine, that even Border Patrol schedules were noted and color-coded. Investigators realized this wasn't improvisation. It was a fully developed supply chain quietly embedded into the nation. The most damning discovery came from digital tablets left behind by fleeing operators. They revealed a command hierarchy centered on a single figure, El Arquitecto, a strategist whose methods mirrored the system disruption tactics described in Jane's Defense Weekly and DW when analyzing hybrid threats in Europe. His network didn't bypass American systems. It merged with them, blending criminal logistics with legitimate transportation routes in Phoenix, Tucson, and beyond. Strategic analysis from intelligence officers painted a darker picture. The tunnels represented more than narcotics trafficking. They were proof of a broader strategic vulnerability. The BBC noted that Western democracies often fail to detect threats that evolve quietly, exploiting bureaucratic blind spots rather than overt aggression. In Arizona's case, the tunnels existed for years beneath the feet of agents, residents, and policymakers. International parallels sharpened the urgency. Ukraine has faced Russian military tunneling and concealed logistics near Avdiivka and Bakhmut underground networks, allowing forces to move weapons unseen. Iran maintains vast subterranean cities to protect ballistic missiles, complicating Israeli and Western intelligence efforts. China uses concealed maritime and undersea routes to move surveillance assets and covert shipments through the South China Sea. In all three cases, adversaries leveraged unseen infrastructure to sidestep stronger opponents. Arizona had become a domestic reflection of these global security struggles, a confrontation between surface-level stability and hidden networks waiting underneath. Meanwhile, the human impact intensified. Families in Phoenix began asking whether their neighborhoods had unknowingly sat atop one of these corridors. Local advocates referenced reports from The Guardian detailing how fentanyl pipelines often operate silently until overdoses surge. Now the silence made sense. The supply hadn't come from across a distant border. It had arrived through engineered corridors disguised as sand and concrete. The discovery of the tunnels forced a national reckoning. How does a superpower defend itself when the threats don't come over the border but under it? And more urgently, if one criminal architect could design a network this advanced, how many others are already studying America's weaknesses, waiting for their chance to build in the dark? What happens when an entire state becomes a battlefield without ever declaring one? That was the reality at 4:03 a.m. when Operation Desert Citadel detonated into motion. The desert air vibrated with rotor wash as Black Hawks swept low over Phoenix and Tucson. Tactical teams stacked at warehouse doors. Streets once silent were suddenly carved open by armored engines. Across Arizona, lights flicked on in suburban windows as families stared out at a scene that looked more like Fallujah than the American Southwest. The largest federal raid in state history had begun. The event unfolded with ruthless coordination. Intelligence units tracking cartel communications had warned that even a 10-second delay could allow fugitives to activate encrypted burn protocols. So every team, FBI, DEA, ICE, HSI, CBP, US Marshals, state tactical units, moved as a single organism. Reuters later reported that 147 targets were struck within a 90-second window, an operational tempo typically reserved for anti-terror raids abroad. But this was domestic soil, and the stakes were higher, preventing a nationwide narcotics surge capable of killing tens of thousands. Agents moved with precision. In Phoenix, SWAT teams breached a fortified home used by mid-level coordinators. Flashbangs illuminated living rooms where cartel operators woke in confusion. In Tucson, drones hovered above rooftops, cutting off escape routes. In Mesa, a warehouse disguised as an agricultural distribution hub concealed crates filled with fentanyl bricks, the same packaging style Al Jazeera previously linked to Cjng shipments intercepted in Central America. One of the most intense confrontations erupted at a converted auto shop north of Phoenix. Guards armed with modified rifles opened fire as agents approached. Tactical teams responded with smoke rounds and breaching charges, pushing inside to find an improvised packaging station, heat-sealing machines, digital scales, vacuum compression equipment, protective suits. Nearly $1 million sat on folding tables, the bills neatly banded evidence of a disciplined financial system, not street-level chaos. The precision investigators later noted reflected the architecture of El Arquitecto himself. As the raids continued, strategic analysts began drawing parallels with global patterns of asymmetric infiltration. Defense News had warned that criminal and paramilitary networks worldwide were adopting the same tactics: concealment, rapid mobility, decentralized operations. Russia used similar compartmentalized logistics near Kherson. Iran's militias employed safehouse chains across Iraq. China's covert maritime networks disguised state shipments as commercial cargo. Arizona was no exception, just the newest theater in a worldwide competition between hidden networks and state power. But while the global patterns were familiar, the human cost inside Arizona was immediate. Residents in Phoenix, Nogales, and Casa Grande watched armored vehicles pass their homes and wondered how deeply the cartel had embedded itself in their communities. Families of overdose victims gathered outside police stations with photos of loved ones, silent reminders of how the 2.4-ton monthly pipeline had devastated lives long before the operation began. The Guardian later reported that Arizona's fentanyl death rate had surged so sharply that coroners struggled to keep up. By sunrise, more than 5,500 suspects were detained. Evidence trucks lined up outside warehouses. Airport units secured cargo areas where bribed handlers had operated undetected for years. The takedown was a victory, but also a revelation. And as Arizona looked out across a dawn filled with dust helicopters, in shock, a larger question emerged: if this much had been hiding in plain sight, what remains undiscovered, and is the next threat already preparing its move? How does a nation defend itself when the danger isn't just outside its borders, but sitting quietly inside the very institutions meant to protect it? That question hit federal analysts like a shockwave as seized laptops, ledgers, and encrypted devices revealed the true depth of Cjng's infiltration. The tunnels were alarming, the drugs were devastating, but the corruption, that silent, invisible erosion, was the part that nearly broke Arizona's security system from within. Investigators found that Border Patrol officers didn't simply look the other way. According to evidence later summarized by Reuters and DW, they had been targeted, profiled, and slowly absorbed into the cartel's payroll. Bank transfers were structured predictable and disguised as financial relief, $40,000 to $70,000 every 2 weeks. Debt, illness, foreclosure, any personal vulnerability became a pressure point. By the time agents realized what had happened, some officers had taken in nearly $480,000 in just 3 months. Not through threats, through carefully engineered dependence. They were not alone. Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport became the second shock. 5 cargo handlers had been quietly switching labels on containers that appeared to carry medical supplies. A 6-second gesture that was all it took to redirect a shipment into the expedited lane, bypassing security entirely. BBC reporting would later note that the method resembled corruption schemes used in large international airports infiltrated by organized crime in South Africa and Latin America. Each worker had been selected with surgical precision. One had a child undergoing leukemia treatment, another faced bankruptcy. The cartel's emissaries approached them not with intimidation but with empathy. A small loan here, a quiet favor there. And then the hook tightened. The moment the first payment was accepted, there was no return. The silence of these individuals didn't come from loyalty, it came from fear of being exposed or retaliated against. Strategic analysts quickly understood what they were facing. This wasn't criminal improvisation, it was systemic infiltration comparable to the hybrid interference studied by Western intelligence agencies abroad. Defense News had long warned that modern criminal networks operate with the same sophistication as insurgent groups. El Arquitecto had designed a system that mirrored those models: compartmentalized cells, parallel communication networks, corrupt insiders, and redundant supply routes. The pattern resembled global trends. In Ukraine, Russian-backed elements infiltrated local administrations before full-scale operations, shaping battlefield outcomes long before troops arrived. In Iran, the Revolutionary Guard built parallel financial and logistics networks that operate inside legitimate civilian sectors. In China, state-linked entities have used front companies to access Western technology and infrastructure often unnoticed until years later. Arizona wasn't an exception. It was part of a global contest between hidden networks and formal authorities, a domestic arena for a strategy usually seen abroad. But for families in Arizona, the human impact hit hardest. Many had spent years questioning why drugs flowed so easily into their communities. Addiction counselors in Phoenix told The Guardian that parents often blamed themselves, believing they had failed to recognize signs early enough. Now they learned that the supply wasn't just persistent, it was engineered to be unstoppable. Schools near major transport routes realized their campuses sat beside the very pipelines feeding overdoses among students. Small towns began holding emergency meetings, asking whether anyone they trusted had been quietly compromised. The breach forced an uncomfortable national question: if corruption can take root so easily inside systems designed to defend the country, what does that mean for America's long-term security? And with networks like this evolving across borders, can the United States protect itself without confronting the vulnerabilities that allowed this infiltration to grow in silence? What happens to a community when it realizes the enemy was never at the gates but already inside its neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces? That was the emotional earthquake that swept across Arizona as news of the tunnel's corruption and 5,500 arrests rippled through cities and rural towns. For years, many residents sensed something was wrong. Strange vehicle traffic at night, warehouses with blacked out windows, sudden spikes in overdoses. But few imagined that a multi-state criminal network had been operating beneath their feet, disguised within familiar places they passed every day. In Phoenix, families gathered outside precincts, holding photos of loved ones lost to fentanyl grief mixing with anger. The Guardian later described scenes where parents stood silently with candles, realizing the drug pipeline that killed their children wasn't the work of local dealers alone. It was the final link in a sophisticated supply chain engineered by an international cartel. Their tragedies were not isolated, they were industrially produced. Town halls in Yuma, Nogales, Casa Grande, and Buckeye overflowed with residents demanding answers. How had airport employees and Border Patrol officers been corrupted without detection? Why had the tunnels gone unnoticed for so long? According to BBC and DW coverage, the federal revelations triggered a wave of distrust toward local institutions. Small communities that once viewed law enforcement as impenetrable now questioned whether the people sworn to protect them had unknowingly or deliberately helped the cartel system flourish. The event exposed fractures in Arizona's social fabric. Business owners who relied on cargo shipments wondered if their warehouses had ever been used as fronts for contraband. School districts near major trucking routes reviewed emergency protocols after learning cartel couriers often drove past playgrounds on their way to drop-off points. Addiction recovery centers reported spikes in anxiety among families suddenly reevaluating years of unexplained overdoses. Strategic analysts warned that the emotional fallout mirrored patterns in global conflict zones. In Ukraine, communities near supply routes targeted by Russia experienced shock when underground networks and hidden arms depots were discovered in civilian areas. In Israel and Iran, exposure of covert militant tunnels altered public trust in local security systems. In US-China, competition revelations about front companies and industrial infiltration have shaken public confidence in trade safety. Arizona became a domestic reflection of those global anxieties, hidden threats eroding civilian life long before authorities intervened. At the same time, there was a surge of unity and resilience. Churches opened support groups. City councils organized fentanyl awareness seminars. Local media aligned with national outlets, including Reuters and Al Jazeera, to explain the mechanics of the tunnel network and the bribery architecture that enabled it. For the first time, many residents understood that their state had been fighting a silent asymmetric war, one that blurred the line between foreign infiltration and domestic decay. Yet beneath the newfound solidarity lay a painful truth: trust had been fractured. Parents questioned whether their communities had been asleep for too long. Former officers admitted privately that the system lacked the oversight necessary to detect corruption early. And as more details emerged about El Arquitecto's psychological profiling operations, many Arizonans wondered whether anyone they knew had been targeted, pressured, or manipulated. The human toll extended well beyond overdoses. It touched identity, belonging, and the belief that America's institutions, backed by the authority of President Donald Trump's renewed security initiatives, could withstand the pressure of transnational cartels evolving faster than traditional law enforcement models. Now, Arizona faces a question bigger than tunnels or arrests. After seeing how deeply a foreign network infiltrated daily life, can communities ever feel truly safe again? And what must change to ensure this breach is never repeated? What does a nation do after discovering that its defenses were breached not by an invading army, but by a criminal architect who weaponized American infrastructure against itself? That question confronted federal officials in the days after Operation Desert Citadel. The tunnels were sealed, the Arrests were recorded, but the deeper wounds, the structural gaps, the institutional vulnerabilities, the shaken public trust remained open and raw. Rebuilding security would demand more than force. It required reimagining how America protects itself in an era where threats hide inside ordinary systems. The event triggered an immediate federal overhaul. Under directives reinforced by President Donald Trump, DHS and the Department of Justice formed the Arizona Redeployment Task Group, a coalition designed to prevent another infiltration of this scale. Reuters reported that over 900 additional Border Patrol agents were reassigned to the region, with specialized units trained in tunnel detection and underground warfare. These teams deployed fiber optic seismic sensors technology previously used in counterinsurgency zones, stretching across vulnerable sections of the Arizona border. At the same time, airports underwent a transformation. Phoenix Sky Harbor introduced biometric cargo systems, tamper-proof digital labels, and randomized employee rotations to disrupt any predictable patterns. Al Jazeera and BBC noted that the new protocols resembled the counter-corruption reforms implemented at airports in Europe following smuggling scandals tied to Balkan crime networks. For many workers, it was the first time they understood how a 6-second label swap had enabled a 2.4-ton monthly narcotics pipeline. Strategic analysts emphasized that America was entering a new era of security, one that mirrored global conflict patterns. Defense News compared Arizona's situation to Ukraine's post-infiltration reconstruction efforts, where authorities had to rebuild surveillance, cybersecurity, and counter-tunneling systems simultaneously. DW drew parallels to the Middle East, where Israel intensified underground detection after discovering Iranian-backed tunnels. The Guardian highlighted US-China competition, noting that as criminal and state actors evolve, domestic infrastructure becomes an attractive battlefield for influence and infiltration. Arizona now stood at the center of that global shift. The breach forced a sober recognition security was no longer a line on a map. It was a moving adaptive system, one that required constant vigilance, transparency, and technological superiority. The human side of the rebuilding effort was equally vital. Community recovery programs expanded across Phoenix, Tucson, and Yuma, offering mental health support for families traumatized by years of silent infiltration. Schools received federal grants to enhance campus security and addiction counseling. Local leaders worked closely with DEA to host public briefings explaining the mechanics of cartel operations so residents could recognize early warning signs. For many, this transparency offered the first glimmer of restored trust. Yet the challenge remained steep, as analysts warned through The Guardian and Cjng's criminal networks adapt quickly. Evidence retrieved from El Arquitecto's encrypted files hinted at exploratory routes through New Mexico and West Texas. This meant the victory was decisive but not final. Arizona's breach revealed a larger national dilemma. How does America balance freedom and mobility with the need for uncompromising security? How does it reinforce institutions without eroding the liberties that define the country? And how does it maintain global prestige when domestic vulnerabilities can be exploited as easily as foreign ones? Operation Desert Citadel proved one thing: victory is possible, but maintaining it requires a public willing to confront uncomfortable truths, leaders committed to transparency, and systems robust enough to resist corruption at every level. Which raises the final unresolved question: after witnessing how deeply one network penetrated America's defenses, will the nation transform fast enough to stop the next infiltration, or will another architect already be studying its weaknesses in silence? Arizona's Operation Desert Citadel exposed one of the most sophisticated criminal infiltrations in U.S. history, a network of underground tunnels, corrupt insiders, and airport manipulation engineered by the Cjng cartel. Launched under President Donald Trump's heightened security directives, the 4 a.m. raid mobilized 3,200 federal agents, striking 147 targets within a 90-second window. The operation dismantled a system capable of moving 2.4 tons of narcotics monthly and revealed financial ledgers showing nearly $500,000 in bribes paid to targeted Border Patrol and airport employees. Global parallels emerged immediately. Much like Russia's subterranean logistics in Ukraine, Iran's hardened tunnel systems, and China's covert transport routes, Arizona's breach showed how modern adversaries exploit hidden infrastructure to bypass traditional security lines. The human toll, marked by a 380% rise in fentanyl deaths, left communities demanding accountability and transparency. Federal agencies responded with sweeping reforms, seismic tunnel sensors, biometric cargo systems, and intensified anti-corruption oversight. Yet analysts warn that criminal networks evolve quickly, and preliminary evidence suggests exploratory routes in neighboring states. The operation delivered victory, but the enduring question remains, will America reinforce its defenses fast enough to prevent the next silent infiltration?